Hi and welcome everybody. I'm George Anderson from Webrit, and today I'd like to take you through a presentation on defeating polymorphic phishing. We chose this subject as in our recent September threat brief, we saw that there was a 74% increase in the average monthly phishing incident count. So that was from the first quarter to the second quarter of 2016, so a pretty staggering rise. And then on further analysis of that data, we found that this increase is mostly attributable to a phenomenon we know as polymorphic URLs. This method is employed by phishers to really generate thousands of slightly different phishing URLs at once as part of a single phishing campaign. And the idea behind this method is to make it harder for traditional defense technologies to stop all the phishing attacks because of their varying characteristics. So anyway, there's a questions panel, and I'll try and come to questions at the end if you've got questions, but please do ask questions. So let's just look at the agenda we're going to try and cover today and go through. In this presentation, I'm going to look quite a holistic view of what phishing threats we face today. We're going to look at different types of phishing and our current phishing threat reality. We're going to look at both user and technical phishing mitigations. We're going to look at why traditional phishing defenses often fail. And we're going to look at a new defense approach, real-time anti-phishing, and why that works and why that's effective. So quite a lot of ground to cover in the 42 minutes or so we've got in the left in this presentation. So a very busy slide. Now, I do apologize for this slide. It's probably the busiest slide I think I've ever presented. The reason I've done that is just there are lots of phishing statistics out there, and these are just some of the more recent ones. Verizon's report recovers a phishing success rate of 30% opened. A CEO phishing fraud, a 90% success rate. That was quite a staggering figure again to come out from. That was the Email Laundry brought that out. Growth of 200% in phishing in the UK. Really that's a testing ground for the USA. So it's always interesting to see what happens. It sort of flip-flops between those two markets, what's going on. And then a 61% growth in Q2 2016, and that's from the anti-phishing working group, actually which Webrit are a member of, and a lot of other security vendors are members of as well. So their figures actually slightly lower than ours, in fact. Spearfishing in particular gets a lot of mentions this year, and I think it's very high in everybody's mind. And of course, the huge association between phishing and ransomware. So again, as I said, there's lots of stats. The reality on phishing seems to be a bit like everything else. It's actually got a lot worse this year. It's got smarter this year is maybe the way to describe it. Not necessarily more of it, but it's just got smarter. So let's look at some of the statistics that Webrit actually saw. When it comes to the daily numbers of all the things that Webrit finds and we put through our threat intelligence platform, usually we're correlating very large numbers. But sometimes the most damaging attacks tend to be those starting with a phishing attack. In addition to analyzing things like URLs to determine if they're associated with generally malicious behavior, we look for new phishing URLs, also known as zero-day phishing URLs. And as you see, that number isn't huge, but it is still significant. We find over 6,000 new phishing sites per day. Our threat brief chart here shows that unique zero-day phishing URLs we've seen by month since the beginning of 2016. Hence that figure I started the presentation with, the 74% increase in average monthly count in the second quarter compared to first quarter. So last year in 2015, we saw polymorphism become the norm for things like malware. Very much, part of our threat brief from last year was the fact that nearly all the malware we were seeing was polymorphic. And in 2016, it's very clear to us that it's becoming the norm for phishing as well, and for phishing URLs, that they're using this polymorphic approach. Some of the things we also look at within the Webrit Threat Intelligence platform is identifying the companies that are most often targeted by unique zero-day phishing URLs. And during the first half of 2006, now 6 of these companies are technology firms, and 4 are related to finance. The chart above shows the monthly unique phishing URL counts for the 6 technology firms that feature in the top 10. So in January, Google had around about 9,000 URLs, and Facebook was a close second with over 6,500. The February numbers are almost equal, but then if you start looking in March, they tend in the opposite direction. They actually trend the opposite way. So by June, Google had over 25,000 URLs in that month alone, a higher count than the other 5 technology companies actually combined. Facebook, meanwhile, had fallen to 5th among the technology companies with only around about 1,600 new URLs. So the sharply increased counts for Google are really primarily due to the use of polymorphic URLs, thousands of sites with small variants from a single IP address, set up for phishing campaigns. Just to give the other side of that top 10, obviously the chart looks at the 4 financial companies in the top 10 of most commonly phished websites. from January through May, we saw PayPal, Wells Fargo, switch positions each month. By the way, one of the things I would add is our data. WebRoot data is obviously based on what we see back from our customers and our OEM partners. So there's a slight bias as well to the Western markets. So obviously things like Asia Pac to Australia, New Zealand, here in the USA, and also to the UK and EMEA. So in some ways, you've got to look at these in that light. And obviously, there's far more customers in the U.S., so you get far more U.S. Situations coming here. So that's why we've got Chase, PayPal, and we've got Wells Fargo, who are all sort of like common U.S. banks. But obviously, the figures show other banks and other financial services things, but just lower down this particular list. I think the dramatic thing here was really basically, as you can see, the yellow line was Wells Fargo's counts from way under 2,000 in May to nearly 24,000 in June. And that Wells Fargo is almost as high as the June count for Google as well. So the explanation for the Wells Fargo increase is really the same reason as for the Google increase. Phishers are shifting to polymorphic URLs to target numerous users at once while avoiding detection by the traditional methodologies. So a quick look at some of those sort of phishing evasion techniques. While stealing credentials through fake login pages is really old news, phishing is still probably the most effective method of compromising a user or network. Phishing sites are turning to new tactics really to evade detection and maintain their effectiveness. Because obviously we keep, security companies, we keep building the walls higher, and as we build the walls higher, they look at ways either going around the wall or making it more difficult for us. So two recent trends we've seen this year include using JavaScript to prevent or make it difficult for the user to leave the page, quite an interesting approach. And phishing sites have also reverted to what we're using, plain text, to avoid sort of HTML analysis, one of the techniques that's used, and so be detected in that way. So these are the key things we've seen earlier this year about phishing sites. As far as sort of, what risks, I know a lot of stats at the beginning, but our own stats, we've actually seen more phishing sites and phishing pages in the first half of 2016 than we saw in the whole of 2015. So quite a dramatic increase there. And based on the number of users contributing data, we saw that the average user has annually, we'd recommend, a 92% chance of being a zero-day visitor to a phishing site. This is obviously a huge risk level, and one of the key reasons why user education and robust anti-phishing measures must be put in place. Only then really can you start stopping sort of the infections that come or the loss of valuable data like credentials or even worse pins or other really sensitive information from going out the door. So quite staggering stats if you look at them in that sense. So a quick look, as I said, to try and make this quite a holistic presentation. I think the slide has managed to skip past there. So we're going to look at different types of phishing. So all these phishing types are really very, very common today. There are other forms of phishing too, things like clone phishing. This is the type of phishing where a previously delivered and legitimate email containing an attachment or link has its content and recipient address taken and used to create an almost identical cloned email. But anyway, let's look at each of these forms of phishing in turn, because you need to be aware of these as well and need to understand the dynamics behind each of these. So if we look at generic phishing, this is a good place really to almost define phishing for us if we want to look at definitions. Phishing is really any fraud where the attacker tries to learn information such as your login credentials or account information by masquerading as a reputable entity or person in an email, IM, or any other communication channel. I think that's probably one of the neatest definitions I've seen for it. And basically, it's a scam, if you like it, if you want to look at it, if you want to put it in really simple language. Phishing can obviously take place in email and text, instant messaging, in advertising and web pages, social networking sites, and blogs. And traditional phishing was obviously by email and very scattergun in its approach. I want to kind of equate that to maybe all the Nigerian and Chinese banking scams, saying a long-lost relative left you a small fortune, just give me your banking details. Today, they often contain zip file attachments or double extensions, or can be more subtle, like the word macro example I'll show you a little bit later. All phishing tries to social engineer, which is why awareness training is becoming such a big thing right now. We're seeing lots of companies, I think KnowBe4 is the one that sort of particularly comes to mind at the moment, doing a lot of work in the area of setting up things or, training courses for people to not be fooled by, not be scammed and not be socially engineered. So very key to do that. I would say, I think regardless of even of all that training, some of the sophistication of the attacks is such that unless you're completely paranoid, you're going to probably be successfully phished. So it's a very, very difficult thing to defend against. So you need to do other things apart from the training side. So, one of the most recent ones I think I can think of, particularly in this area of the generic phishing thing, is an Apple Store emails you with a refund request page and not only asks you for your full address, but also your credit card data. And that's been a pretty typical one kicking around for a while. So, just general things like that, very easy if if you're an owner of an Apple product to be taken in by that. We then have areas like spearfishing and whaling. Spearfishing whaling is really a subset, I would say, of spearfishing. You saw the stats earlier of how successful whaling can be. Whaling is really aiming at these CEOs, and with a figure of 90% success rate on CEOs tricked, I think that really shocked me. And also, there's a lot of evidence this year that a lot of whaling is going on. There's a lot more activity sort of spent at the sea level, if you like. And in fact, to be honest with you, part of the reason the whaling was really the reason that we actually, Webroot originally sort of went into sort of developing a real-time anti-phishing service of some sort, which we actually also have a real-time anti-phishing service. We OEM that service, but we went into developing it because we saw those attacks on high net worth individuals, and they were getting, if you like, spearfished and whaled the whole time, and it was just really essential that we found some other way of preventing them from being scammed. So these attacks obviously have a simple a variety of purpose, from simple theft through to complex espionage or even stock exchange fraud. So there's a whole lot of things come in when you start to look at that end of the scams and what goes on there. And really, given the recent results, I think we can really say that phishing protection needs to really start at the very top of the organization from what we've seen that's going on there. Another area that's sort of sometimes overlooked is phishing, which is voice phishing. Scam phone calls are labeled as phishing too, and this is often referred to, as I said, as phishing. The calls can seem very real and genuine, and if done well, really appear to be completely okay. For example, a message that claims to be from your bank may direct you to dial a phone number regarding an issue with your account. Then you're asked for your account number and PIN, of course, which is sort of the way they're going around that. The old call me back on this number trick is also used extensively, and when you check that number, it seems okay, but even that's not always reliable. In fact, I saw something actually a few months ago about the fact that that the number was actually the genuine number, but they had a redirect somehow working on that particular exchange. So you can get to quite sophisticated ways of getting the scam if they're really trying to break in and get information. In organizations, it's usually things like the credentials people are after, calling internally and asking for login details as the other guy's away, all those typical things which go on the session engineering side. I put in this figure because the IRS one, just because it was interesting that the IRS scammers that reported that this year they had 896,000 victims and they collected $26.5 million from doing their phishing scams. So quite a significant amount of money there too. Another form of thing to look at is smishing. Is really SMSfishing or mobile phishing. The usual thing is to abuse your trust and for you to believe you're dealing with someone a friend or a colleague or organization. And as you can see here, smishing is also very sophisticated information it's looking to collect. And as mobile messages become a common way to identify your identity with banks and others, it's vital you're very aware and don't automatically trust message senders unless you're actually expecting that message. So, you can see the little example there from New Zealand credit card, sort of asking your account's been deactivated, go in and sort of reactivate your account sort of thing. So I think because as I said, SMS is used so extensively now for that, it's becoming more and more common to see those sort of phishing attacks as well. Another thing to look at is what we call social media phishing. It's another common phishing area. There are lots of social media scams. The one that we've got actually up here as an example is a PayPal scam to get you to reveal your PayPal details. The obvious things to be aware of in phishing include things like link manipulation, so it's including a link in the initial phishing email designed to fool users into believing it belongs to the organization in question. You look for things like misspelled URLs, subdomains, and embedded links. All those sort of things are commonly used. Things like filter evasion, phishers using images instead of text to make it more difficult for phishing filters to actually detect text commonly used in phishing emails. More sophisticated filters can recover hidden text and images using optical character recognition to scan and filter the image, and that's something to bear in mind. The defenses we have are getting quite sophisticated as well to sort of stop that filter evasion. Obviously, website forgery is used a lot. Phishing attacks are able to alter the user's address bar using JavaScript, for example, by placing a picture of a legitimate URL on the address bar or by closing the original bar and opening a new one. Cross-site scripting is also used to direct the user to log in at the homepage of their bank or financial institution, which appears to be correct. However, obviously, it isn't there. So Another sort of thing is what we call covert redirects, another phishing method. It makes email links look like legitimate, but serves to put someone to an attacker's website. So social media phishing is quite common, comes in, and as you can see, in lots of different forms. So really covering those, so let's start looking around a little bit more at the phishing avoidance side of things and where we are with that. I think by now you're getting the picture that phishing is hard to spot and being made a lot harder to actually stop. And here are sort of 10 sort of things to consider training and educating users about to help avoid them becoming sort of a phishing victim. Plain text emails show image links as URLs so you can read them, and also HTML allows code execution. So by looking at receiving emails in plain text, that obviously can't happen. You can see the actual URLs. So something to consider. I'm not sure if a lot of organizations have actually moved to plain text. I think people like the fact of having a nice signature in HTML, but nonetheless, if you can enforce plain text, it does work particularly well. It's sort of stopping that sort of thing and being very clear about what the URL link is. Obviously, you've got to be skeptical at links and requests, even from friends, and check, obviously, if you're unsure. If I get something from somebody on a Friday afternoon, particularly, I think a lot of phishers try Friday afternoons because people are relaxing, going down for the weekend, and are more prone to click on things, to be honest with you. So be very careful about things you receive about the football game over the weekend or whatever, or anything sort of along that line. Obviously, a favorite trick is to spoof the display name or from the name in an email, hence my earlier thing, but always be suspicious about those things. And I think the phrase look but don't link, and by that I mean click, really does spring to mind. If you hover over a link, you'll obviously see and be able to read the underlying URL, and again, nothing to teach users if they're not aware of that. And of course, Nigerian or Russian scammers don't always have a great command of English, so bad spelling and syntax mistakes are a good thing to look for. Again, as I said, the ones that tend to fool people are not those ones, but at least if people are trained in that, it can help them with the avoidance side of it. Looking at some other things, it might seem blindly obvious, but is your salutation right? And even if it is right, you can still be being socially engineered, so it doesn't matter, but it's a good thing just to check. Spearfishing will obviously know you and even drop friends or acquaintances' names dredged from your social media accounts into the things. And phishers are really professional at what they do. They will be convincing logos, convincing language, convincing colleagues' names, even convincing valid email addresses. So if it's being done professionally and not just a general scam, then it's very, very difficult to detect. So you always need to be aware and suspicious. And if it feels even remotely wrong, it probably is with that sort of communication. And if you're working at getting your IT security to have to check things out in suspicious email, that's worth doing so. So, for instance, being in a security company, there's lots of attempts to phish us here. So we sort of do a lot of in-house training about it, and also a lot of when we don't really suspect anything, we just refer it to our IT, and we obviously don't do anything with it. Corporate phishing avoidance is really another side of it, which is really not a technical side of it, but more sort of some practical things you can do around phishing avoidance. A lot of the phishing attacks abuse corporate names and brands, and really some of those things are beyond the scope of what traditional security organizations actually manage or can do for you. But enterprise reputations can easily be damaged by phishing attacks that incorporate names and brands while targeting members of the public. So some of the best ways to avoid those sort of phishing impacts are to monitor your domain names and social media profiles for corporate brand infringement, to have something put in place to do that. And that's because attackers obviously mimic the look and feel of actual communications from your organization to such an extent they're really indistinguishable from a branding perspective. So if you're doing that brand infringement checking, you're going to pick up a lot of that as well. Obviously, establish and maintain sort of some official enterprise email and social identities, and very, very key that you look after those, and define and communicate widely what you will and will not include in communications to the customers and to the public. Again, a very, very key thing. I mean, I know you'll often see from banks say we'll never ever email you, or etc. So just they make it very clear what sort of communications they will send to you and which ones they won't, and also how to check actually if you're being really good about it as well. And also you need to maintain multiple methods for your customers and the general public to be able to report suspicions concerning received messages as well. So having a feedback mechanism in there is a great thing in avoiding sort of corporate phishing avoidance, if you like. So some of the things which are sort of maybe a bit more left of field there, but nonetheless sort of very key and part of that phishing defense. So as a next step, I really like to look phishing in action and really at ransomware, because in fact, one of the huge problems obviously facing, we've seen huge growth in ransomware, so maybe that's why we've seen the same huge growth in phishing too. I don't think we've managed to correlate it quite to that degree at the moment, but I'm sure that's part of it. And it's used as a very successful way of getting ransomware infections into organizations. So just really, I'm going to look at a ransomware thing that starts with a phishing email and sort of take you through that and just sort of show you that sort of side of things, just that it's clear what's going on. So as I said, it's a growing phishing tactic. This uses the infamous macro infection that comes via an email. In this case, the email is from the U.S. Postal Service. And this type of exploit is not new. In fact, macro malware has been around since Windows 95, so definitely not new. But malware using Office macros is making a major comeback, especially with different sorts of ransomware attacks these days. The source of this exact phish is really, as I said, a USPS email saying they failed to deliver a package. And now for the attachment, instead of changing the icons to look like documents, they actually have you download a harmless Word document. And in this case, it's actually a doc file, so there's nothing there. There's nothing suspicious to set up any alarms. However, once you're opened that sort of document, you're presented with this page here. So what I've done here is I've circled in red the enable content button, because that's the really thing. So they tell you the file is protected by Microsoft Office and that you have to enable the content to actually see the document. This is, of course, absolutely false and is the social engineering trick they're using to get you to click, as it's that one click that will get you actually infected with the ransomware. So you are clean and the document is harmless until you click on that enable content button. And once you do that, you're actually enabling the macro. So I've actually pulled up the macro script for you to see hopefully clearly here. Obviously, on my presenter screen, is really tiny. But as soon as you enable a macro, it immediately resolves the URL and downloads and saves a payload file. In this case, it's a CRSS.exe into your documents folder. That then runs silently in the background, basically encrypting your files. And that's all automated. So once you click that button, well, it's basically off to the races. If your antivirus is really good, or you got some sort of good anti-malware, and then they have really two chances to catch this infection. Once when the URL is trying to resolve, and then next when it's downloaded and trying to execute. Hopefully they catch it, because we all know what happens if they miss it. Say goodbye to those files. This phishing attack is the Locky ransomware. It's an example of Locky, which is quite a common sort of macro ransomware. So just to give you some idea, why it's so key to stop phishing, because it's not necessarily stealing credentials. Often these times it's actually looking at ways of delivering payloads and actually compromising both the user machines and then getting into the network and go further. And because it's all happening silently, it's really very easy to happen. So going on a little bit more, why do many technical phishing defenses fail? Because I think, as a technology company, as a security vendor, we've got to look up there. And there's really many reasons why those defenses fail. Phishing sites themselves are very typically short-lived, and the most dangerous are only active for a few hours. And as you can see now, they're also polymorphic, so it's even making it more difficult. So the window of time which a phishing site is active, we call that the time to live, if you like. And the shorter this time, the harder it is to protect against it using static blacklists or even sort of the traditional ways. Phishing sites are active on average, we see it between about 4 and 8 hours, or much less for the duration of a targeted attack. So again, as that short-lived thing is very, very key. Phishing sites are not necessarily linked to or from other locations on the internet, and that makes them very difficult to discover using things like web crawlers or some of the other ways that people have built blacklists up. Apart from the fact, how quickly can you actually scan the entire internet and look for those things? I think we at Webroot scan the entire IP4 v6 space about 3 times a day. And even so, that would not be enough to keep up with real-time phishing attacks or with polymorphic phishing. Just would not be quick enough. So, I'm not sure how many vendors do more than that, but we pride ourselves on being able to do that. So, pretty significant effort, and that's still not working. Things like services from FishTank and Google's Safe Browsing API, they obviously find phishing sites, but that data is typically stale, as I said, by the time it's published. As I said, it's that short-livedness thing. Even sophisticated filtering techniques cannot really allow for everything. Polymorphic URLs, as I said, just add to that detection issue. And while we've covered things like user education and the human firewall factors, and it does help, too often, enterprises will actually limit the scope of defenses against phishing to employee behavior management. And today, that's plainly not enough. So, a lot of things, I'm not going to dive deeply into this because I think it would be, don't want to get technical. I just wanted to really cover the top reasons why people are missing those things. So let's very briefly and quickly look at real-time anti-phishing and why that's a major breakthrough. Obviously, it's leveraging things like artificial intelligence, advanced machine learning, contextual analysis, and scoring. And as I mentioned, we actually had developed the service over 2 years ago, and about 3 years ago, and we've leveraged all those things and content classification really to automate the detection of phishing sites and conduct real-time validation prior to what we call the point of delivery to the user. So what we term time of need scans. So the process we run really basically take milliseconds and cause minimal user interruptions while being so really highly accurate in detecting polymorphic phishing sites. And actually in tests against other solutions, our real-time anti-phishing outperformed every competitor, including crowdsourced and some other machine learning approaches. And I think the real reason why the real-time anti-phishing works is actually that thing about, if you like, time of need scans, which is what we're really doing to stop phishing in real time. Why that works so well is because is that our threat intelligence platform and also our Bright Cloud threat intelligence services are being constantly fed with new and relevant data. And so we evaluate hundreds of sites, so we're able to use that, and that can stop a lot of it. I mean, the time to live then, if it's been up for a few hours, then obviously we can stop it with that sort of information. But then we can also sort of do things as when we actually start to do time of need scanning, we actually evaluate hundreds of site attributes basically in those milliseconds, as well as contextual factors like, what's the web reputation, the I reputation, the time the site has existed, the recent threat history of that site. All this is added into and correlated and analyzed together, and that allows us to generate a very accurate risk score. And for the user endpoint, security then obviously automatically blocks the website before the user gets the web page delivered, and we give them block messages when we tell them being phished. So doing it that way is a highly accurate and a very effective way of doing it. And it's just that time of need scanning, which I think is completely unique in the industry, is the reason why real-time anti-phishing, as we term it anyway, which is time of need scanning, is really a major breakthrough to the way that phishing sites are being tackled. And now polymorphic phishing is obviously the norm, like polymorphic malware. That get my tongue tied there. So my cloud-driven real-time interception approaches are really the way we think are the only way to actually technically mitigate the phishing risk. I think no matter what you do, otherwise, any other approach we know is basically behind the 8 ball. And one, because of the polymorphism, and also because of the time to live. So, getting close to the end of the 30 minutes that this presentation is trying to do, and hopefully get some questions. I see there's some questions from the audience, so we'll get to those. Obviously, you can try out real-time anti-phishing if you're. We've got a free, unlimited 30-day trial of our business product, which includes that. That's something you can just literally go to, try it out. It's unlimited. You can you see it in action for yourself, and that's a very easy way if you're coming from that perspective and you're looking to do that. If you're an MSP or a partner in that sense, obviously you can do it that way. Also, as I said, I think I mentioned earlier, we sell this as an OEM service. So if you actually are offering a service or want to do it as a service sort of thing, we have a Bright Cloud real-time anti-phishing service. And again, that's delivered through something like a REST API or a software development kit. So again, that's another side to doing it. So if you want to build it into something, then we enable you to do that as well. So that's actually the easy way to really experience real-time anti-phishing is to do that and go to our site and do that. Otherwise, I'm not sure anybody else can offer you that. So really, that's me closing. Thank you for your time today. I hope you find this snapshot of phishing useful, and you have some thoughts about how best to counter this threat within your organization or whoever you're working for. I'll go to the questions now. I've got 7 questions. And the first one is right top of the list. What is the success-fail rate? And I'll go from there. So the success-fail rate is basically about 99.8%. We've got accuracy, if you like, in being able to stop those sort of attacks through the real-time anti-phishing, which is a lot higher than any need. And in fact, you can almost tune it if you want to the point of overkill if you wanted to do that, if you really wanted to really stamp down on it. But typically, the product running as a standard service, 99.7%, 99.8%, a very, very high success rate at identifying phishing sites. I've got a question here. Does your advanced machine learning detection use probabilistic methods? I actually don't know the answer to that question. I would think because of the different methods we use, probably probabilistic methods are used as well, especially when we do the scoring and things like that. It'd be very important to do that. Some of the features that someone's asking about the polymorphism in phishing. The polymorphism isn't really in the phishing, though in fact there's polymorphing in the malware, if you like, that's delivered. The polymorphism is really in the sense that the attackers are using ways of subtly changing URLs. So whereas in the past you would sort of identify a URL and that's associated with a phishing site, in this case what they're doing is they're actually creating thousands of URLs as part of a single phishing campaign. So in fact, you can look at the phishing campaign, you can look at the identity of the phisher and the attacker, but instead of associating that with just one URL, it's associated with thousands of different URLs. So that's the real polymorphism that's going on. It's the fact that there's that slight variance going on. And it's exactly the same thing that's happened with malware is the fact that they've moved to polymorphism in malware. So if you were using standard signature detection, then your chances of identifying that is an attack is very hard because 97% of the samples you see are going to be totally different from the original one. So it's a complex area, and it's actually why a lot of companies, you'll see a lot of our competitors, particularly at the moment, launching new sort of approaches and also following a lot of real-time cloud-based determination approaches to try and stop this malware because of that variety and that polymorphism. I mean, basically, polymorphism killed AV and AV signature approach and made it basically useless last year. So we're seeing the same thing happening with detecting phishing, and so it's just interesting. See what other questions we've got here. I've actually got 9, or actually 8 or so. What if the internal is browsing a friendly website that's been infected, such as a partner? A very good question, actually. We'll probably we allow, in fact, us as a company, we're just about to allow the administrator to override that if they want to do that. But we do find friendly websites that are obviously bad. In fact, some of our other research in that area, I think, showed that out of the top 10 most popular sites that users go to, and things like business and economy, travel, etc. I think about half of those are also at the highest ranking and the most suspicious and dangerous URLs on the internet at the same time. So in fact, a lot of good sites actually become bad sites, delivering malvertising. We didn't not discuss particularly other techniques of infecting people, but websites in particular, that whole web thing is very, very, very difficult. That's why we will actually look at, before we go into the real-time anti-phishing, apart from looking at the URL itself and determine the legitimacy of the URL, we actually look at the web reputation of that site, and we use reputation and categorize it together. So often we can, if we know the reputation's gone bad or poor, we'll actually block on that time. So if the internal user is browsing a friendly website that's been infected, such as a partner, it's likely we will try and block that. In fact, I think it's a quite high percentage we will block that, and obviously you get someone disgruntled user saying, "Hey, you blocked me going to somewhere I should be able to allow to go." But actually, at that particular point in time, when they were trying to go there, that site's malicious. If I'm browsing, I'm going to read this question. If I'm browsing in standard user mode and not in local admin mode, does ransomware still jump to the local admin side of things and encrypt those files? The answer is if it can find those files, it will go and jump and encrypt them. So yes, it can jump to the local admin side of things. So something to watch out there. I would love to double. I'm not absolutely a technical specialist, so but my belief is that's the way it is. So I'll just caveat that a little bit there. I've got a message here from somebody. I was scammed last week. Upon starting up the computer in the morning, the following message was displayed. The server, Microsoft's asking for your name and password. The server reports that is da-da-da. Warning, AntiPhishing calls Windows support immediately. Your username and password will be used. Basic authentication connection not secure. And then we later noted that the message was actually from Microsoft.com/9219. So obviously a complete scan there at startup. Some little dropper had got down there onto the machine, and the scam was being activated. So just what goes on there. I've got someone saying, not sure how the IRS cameras report would think they would like to hide. Yes, it wasn't actually. It was the FBI reporting on the IRS cameras. It wasn't actually the IRS cameras reporting. Just to clarify that. But obviously, that's more phone. That's more those phishing scams, if you like, voice scams, where people calling up and tricking people that way. Both, I've got targeting users on the company networks, they're targeting customers of those companies. I think the answer is both of those things happen. So that's basically it. That's the questions, I think. Oh, hang on, I've got some more. I've gone to the top now. Always a danger when you answer questions. There's a lot, so don't want to run out of time here. Does your application run on the end device, such as PC or mobile phone, or on the email server? If an end device, what sort of resources are needed, etc. So far, we haven't implemented real-time anti-phishing on our mobile devices as yet, which is Android and iOS. Something I think we will obviously do, because actually both of those products, in fact, the iOS product in particular is a secure web browser, so there's no reason why we couldn't use the secure web browser to do that sort of work. And similarly with Android, there's things to do there, so we could do that. So what are resources are needed? Again, the technology we're talking about runs on PCs and Macs. We've got a very low CPU, very small footprint. WebRoot's known for is extremely small footprint. So not very much in the way of resources needed, either system resources, RAM, or even of disk space. I think our disk space is under 20 meg on a device, so just to give you some idea of how small it is compared to a traditional AV. And again, battery life and effect on the mobile device. All of our products we test on the mobile device to use minimal, memory requirements and mobile device requirements. But again, as I said, we've not got real-time anti-phishing working at the moment on the mobile devices. I've got another question here. With ransomware, all you have to do is a system restore now. I wish that was the case. I mean, one of the things I'll mention then, it's interesting because it's just an aside really, is there was obviously ransomware for Macs actually came out this year for the first time. So in February using JavaScript. And that particular form of ransomware is called Caranger. And what it did was actually it lay pretty much dormant on the system for about 91 days. And it wasn't a reason, it was a good reason for it lying dormant for 91 days. And the reason for that was that it was basically looking at all the automatic restores that the Mac system makes and keeps backups of. And basically it was encrypting them all quietly as those restores were created. And then when you got to the 91-day point, of course, there was no restore for you to actually then come back and actually to get it. So you were done and dusted in that sense. So no, I'm afraid system restore is one thing. Obviously, going to backups, if you've got offline or you've got sort of air gapped backups, you can go that way. The other thing we obviously advise people to do, and there's a lot of good services, SaaS services, cloud services you can get to do that for you. The other thing I think is really important is it depends how deep the infection is from the ransomware. Often it's not just a single system. Obviously, it's gone to mapped and network shared devices. So again, system restore is a bit difficult. So can take time, and time is obviously money for any business. So looking at also having something in the way of business continuity can be a good approach too. But I'm afraid system restore, the VSS shadow drives, all those sort of things these days tend to be encrypted and are unavailable or even obliterated in some cases by the malware. So something to bear in mind. A system restores. It sounds easy, but that's actually not going to solve the problem. How does the desktop client interoperate with VPN connections? Good question, because obviously you're going through a VPN, you're going through a tunnel. You're still going to resolve that request. You're still going to ask for that particular URL and that web address. So at the point that request is happening, we see that request, if you like, through the firewall at our end on the device itself, and then we query it. So it doesn't really matter if it's a VPN connection. The name of the Mac ransomware was Caranger, Keranger. So that's that question hopefully answered. So I think hopefully I've answered all the questions. Really enjoyed chatting to you guys, even though it's sort of in text and online that way. I hope you did enjoy the presentation and take away. And obviously the recording is available if you want to come back and have a look. But thank you for your time. And if you want to ask me any questions that are direct, you don't want to answer, publicly at this, I think basically my email address is ganderson@webroot.com. I don't put it on the screen because I don't want to scrape that way, but ganderson that's SON@webroot.com. I got another little question I saw here. Can the mouse hover principle be spoofs? I don't know the answer to that, so that's one of the questions. Lots of questions I don't really know the answer to, but that one I'm not sure about. I thought it would be unlikely actually, but I'm sure some threat researcher will say to me, oh, yes, it can be. Okay, so I'm going to close there. It's reached sort of the 40-minute mark. Thank you again for your time. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope to be presenting to you again soon. Thank you.